The fog sits low at the mouth of this holler, thick enough that the creek sounds before it shows itself. No road noise out here, no signal. I checked before I left the truck. The only thing I've got in my coat pocket is a paper map, hand-drawn by a man who's been walking these ridges since before I was born. But I don't need much else right now because I'm already reading the weather. There's a chimney line half a mile in, smoke curling low and heavy against the hillside. Rain before noon. I know that, without a forecast. Stay with me through this countdown, 10 to 1, and you will too. Somewhere around number 6, I'll show you something these families do with their front doors that most people write off as old habit. It's actually a precision system. And at number 2, we'll get to the one thing holler people protect above everything else, including food, and why every modern prepper has this exactly backward. If that sounds useful, subscribe. Let's get into it. Number 10, the smoke read. I watched an old man in a holler near the Virginia line check his chimney smoke every morning before he'd let his boys cross the creek to school. Didn't matter if the sky was clear. He'd step off the porch, look back at the stack, and make his call. Most people think smoke is just what fire makes. Out here, it's a short-range weather instrument that costs nothing and works without a battery. When smoke rises clean and fast, you've got stable air and dropping humidity. A travel day. When it hangs low and drags along the roofline, pressure is dropping and rain is coming, sometimes within hours. When smoke bends toward the mountain instead of away from it, a storm is building on the ridge above you, not rolling in from the horizon. A weather app gives you what's happening at the nearest monitoring station, maybe 20 miles away, over a ridge that changes everything. It doesn't tell you what's happening in your specific hollow at 6 in the morning when you're deciding whether to send children across a creek that floods fast and drops slow. The smoke does. He never explained this to me directly. I just watched him do it, morning after morning, until I understood what he was watching for. That's how most of this knowledge travels. Not in books, but from one person standing next to another, both of them looking at the same thing. Smoke is only one language. The next thing these families read, you've walked past 100 times and never thought to look at. Number 9, the threshold system. Every old home place I've walked into in a deep holler, the front door faces the same general direction, not toward the road. A lot of these places didn't have one until the 1950s, and some still don't. Toward the morning light and away from the direction the hard weather comes from. Modern construction is designed around lot lines, street access, curb appeal. Where the prevailing storm track runs isn't usually on the list. Out here, it was the only list. The Appalachian ridges funnel weather in consistent directions, and the people who built these places 200 years ago figured that out fast, because if you built it wrong, you felt it every morning in your firewood consumption and your floor temperature. A covered porch on the right side catches the low winter sun at exactly the angle needed for handwork in the afternoon, mending, sharpening, sorting seed when the light inside is already gone. In summer, that same overhang blocks the high sun and keeps rain from driving in. Passive climate management built into wood and stone, with no thermostat and no electric bill. I'll come back to this at number 6, because the door direction isn't only about weather. Architecture is one layer. What they store inside tells a deeper story. Number 8, the layered larder. One August, I helped a woman put up 200 quarts of green beans. 3 days at her kitchen table, stringing and snapping and packing jars. By February, she still had 60 quarts left. She knew her family down to the quart, how much they'd eat across a winter, how to stretch it if the next growing season started late. That's not canning as a hobby. That's a closed-loop food system calibrated to one specific family in one specific valley. Root cellars dug into a hillside hold between 35 and 50 degrees year-round without power. Cold enough for root vegetables, apples, cured meat, without freezing them solid. Sealed crocks protect dry goods from moisture and pests better than any cardboard pantry box. The oldest jars get used first. The newest go to the back. The system self-corrects across seasons. A flood or road washout that cuts a holler off for 2 or 3 weeks is a normal winter event in some of these places. It's not an emergency if you're already provisioned for it. The grocery store 45 minutes away is useful in good weather. It has nothing to do with survival when the road is underwater. They're not prepping for collapse. They never stopped living, like the road might not be there tomorrow. tomorrow. Knowing what you have stored is one skill. Knowing when you're running low before it becomes a crisis is another. But before we get into that, I want to step back for a second. Because here's what I've noticed looking at the first three things on this list. Most people see holler life from the outside and read it as poverty or stubbornness. What they're actually looking at is a closed-loop system that doesn't need them. Every practice we've covered so far is an early warning system. Checking the smoke intercepts a bad weather decision before it becomes an emergency. Building the door right intercepts heat loss before it becomes a repair. Keeping the larder deep intercepts a food shortage before it becomes hunger. Modern convenience reversed this entirely. We got very good at emergency response and stopped investing in prevention. You call for help after the crisis. Holler people don't let it become one. That shift changes everything about what the next numbers mean. Number 7, the creek calendar. I've seen a man refuse to cross a creek that looked to me perfectly calm. He stood on the bank for a moment, looked upstream and said, "She's talking." We went back the way we came. By afternoon, that creek was over the road by 2 feet. A person who's lived next to the same creek for 20 or 30 years knows its personality. The sound changes before the water rises visibly, a low, continuous roar under the normal ripple. The color shifts when it's carrying silt from upstream rain, even when no rain has fallen where you're standing. The foam pattern in eddies thickens when volume is moving faster than the surface shows. These aren't mystical signs, they're physics, observable, learnable, consistent. In a roadless holler, the creek often is the road. When it rises fast, and in Appalachia, creeks can rise 6 feet in under an hour after a ridge storm, the community seals itself off. Knowing when that's coming before it happens is the difference between being inconvenienced for an afternoon or stuck for 3 days with someone who needs a doctor. You can't learn to read a creek from a video. You have to live next to one long enough that it starts to tell you things. The creek connects everything downstream. What connects the people is something less visible. Number 6, the neighbor web. There's a woman up one of these hollows who's delivered more babies than most county nurses. No clinic, no credential. Everybody up that ridge knows who she is, and when the road washes out in February, everybody knows where to go. She's not running a practice. She's part of a system. This is what outsiders miss. The assumption is that isolation means each family survives independently. Self-reliance, meaning you don't need anybody. That's exactly backward. The social web is the survival system. Everyone knows who has the chainsaw that can cut through a fallen oak across the road. Everyone knows who's good at splinting until help arrives. Everyone knows who keeps the draft horse when the truck won't start. That knowledge is mapped informally across the whole community, stored in relationships rather than registries, and activated automatically when something goes wrong. Not as charity, but as self-interest. The man with the chainsaw today needs your hay bales in March. The oldest home places here, built before roads, before county services, have their front doors facing the most traveled path between neighbors, not the creek, not the ridge. The door faces the community. That's what number 9 was building toward. No insurance company, no emergency room, no delivery service replaces this web when the roads are gone and someone is in trouble at 2 in the morning. You either have it or you don't, and you can't buy it. You build it over years of being a neighbor worth calling. The loneliest thing in a holler isn't being without neighbors. It's being a neighbor nobody trusts. Number 5, the water habit. I knew an old man who checked his spring box every morning before breakfast. 40 years. Lifted the wooden lid, looked at the clarity, listened to the flow, replaced the lid exactly as it was. He told me the one morning he skipped it was the morning a possum had drowned in the box overnight. That's not a story about bad luck. That's a story about what a 40-year habit is for. Holler people maintain their water sources the way others maintain vehicles. Not because something is broken, but because knowing what normal looks like is the only way you catch what's wrong before it makes someone sick. Spring boxes are covered, cleaned seasonally, positioned on the uphill side of the property. Animals are kept back. Upstream changes, new neighbors, a logging operation starting, color shifts after a dry spell breaks, get noticed and thought about. In a remote holler, a contaminated water source isn't an inconvenience. There's no hospital an easy drive away, no municipal system to switch to. Prevention isn't a philosophy out here. It's the only real option. We'll go deeper at number 2 into how these families organized everything around water. But first, every time there's a disaster in this country, people rush to buy generators, freeze-dried food, emergency filtration kits. The people in these hollers watch that happen and find it genuinely puzzling. Not because the equipment is useless, but because the moment you're reaching for emergency equipment, you've already lost the first fight. Numbers 7 through 5 all operate the same way. Continuous low-level attention to a creek, to a social web, to a water source replaces high-cost emergency response. You don't need an emergency filter if you've maintained your spring for 40 years and would know within one morning if something changed. The survival industry sells products for the crisis moment. Holler culture eliminates the crisis moment by habit. Those are not the same thing and never will be. The next numbers are harder to accept. Number 4, the restraint calculus. I watched a man's truck slide off an iced logging road in February, went sideways slowly, the way heavy things do on ice, and came to rest against a bank at a bad angle. First thing he did was sit still for a full minute, hands on the wheel, engine running. I thought he was in shock. He wasn't. He was figuring out which direction the truck would move when he opened the door, whether the slope would pull it further if he shifted weight, what the ground looked like under the ice on the downhill side. When he finally got out, he did it in one careful motion, kept his weight on the uphill door frame, and never let his feet slide. Got the truck out in 20 minutes. No second incident, no injury. In a place with no cell service, where the nearest help is an hour away in good conditions, a second mistake doesn't just compound the first. It turns a problem into something life-threatening. The instinct to act fast, which modern emergency culture reinforces constantly, is exactly wrong in a holler. The most expensive moments I've seen out here started with someone moving before they understood what they were moving into. The holler habit is to pause, read the full picture, identify what you're about to lose before committing to an action. Wastes a minute, saves an hour, occasionally saves considerably more than that. The mountain doesn't care how fast you moved, it cares whether you moved right. Number 3, the knowledge debt. There was a woman up a hollow near the Tennessee line who knew where every medicinal plant within 5 miles of her house grew, what time of year to take, which part, which preparation treated which condition. She didn't learn it from a book. She learned it from her mother, who learned it from hers. Walking the same creek banks and hillsides across generations, the knowledge transmitted in the field at the exact moment it was needed. She died at 91. Most of what she knew died with her. That's true of nearly every deep holler in Appalachia right now. The generation that held the full system, the plant knowledge, the watershed memory, which slopes flood in what conditions, which springs run dry in drought years, that generation is almost gone. And what they carried wasn't written down, because it didn't need to be as long as they were alive to show you. Watching someone correctly split a specific wood or recognize a plant safe to handle versus one that isn't. That knowledge doesn't transfer through a screen the way it transfers when you're standing next to the person and they correct what you're doing wrong in real time. The knowledge isn't only in the technique, it's in the adjustment. The best survival manual ever written is an old person who'll still talk to you, and that resource is running out faster than any other on this list. People ask me what to buy to be more prepared. My answer hasn't changed. Buy less, learn more. The things that have kept people alive in these mountains for 200 years don't weigh anything, don't need a charger, don't have a shelf life, but they die with people. And that's exactly what they've been doing. The survival industry sells products. The holler system develops perception. Those are fundamentally different transactions, and only one of them works at midnight in February when the road is gone. Number 2, the water before everything. Old home places in these hollers look, at first glance, like they were built without any particular plan. House here, barn over there, garden somewhere else, outhouse at the far edge. Then I learned to trace the water. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. The spring box sits high on the slope, always. The house below it, close enough to reach but far enough downhill that nothing from the house drains back toward it. The garden positioned neither directly uphill of the spring nor downhill where runoff returns. The barn further down, laterally offset from the water line. The outhouse at the lowest practical point, angled away from the natural drainage. Every structure, every fence line, every worn path on an old Appalachian homestead is a decision made around protecting the water source. The whole property is a water management system. The house is just one component. Modern preppers argue about food storage first, calories, shelf life, storage method. Holler people never had that argument because the priority was settled generations before any of these families were born. One contaminated spring disables a family entirely. Every other preparation, the larder, the firewood, the neighbor web, becomes irrelevant if the water fails. Preppers talk about food storage first. Holler people never had that argument. Water was settled generations ago. Number 1, the attention that doesn't switch off. I spent a winter up a hollow with no road access. Moved in before the last passable weeks in October, stocked what I needed, and settled in. By February, I noticed something I hadn't expected. I wasn't worried, not as an act of will. I genuinely wasn't, even though everything could go wrong out there. The creek could rise and take the footbridge. The firewood could fall short. The weather could turn hard in a direction I hadn't prepared for. It took me a while to understand why I wasn't afraid. It was because I'd already dealt with everything at the level of habit, weeks before any of it had a chance to become a problem. Checking the spring each morning wasn't a safety check. It was the same motion as making coffee, a daily act that also told me whether anything had changed. Watching the smoke wasn't a weather consultation. It was just something I did stepping off the porch. Reading the creek when I crossed it wasn't analysis. It was paying attention the same way I paid attention to everything out there. That's what this whole countdown has been describing. Not 10 separate survival techniques. One practice expressed 10 different ways. The smoke red, the creek, the spring box, the door direction, the larder, the neighbor web. Every number on this list is a downstream expression of one root practice. These people never stop paying attention to where they live. Not crisis-level vigilance, the ordinary, consistent, daily kind of attention that converts environmental information into decisions before the environment makes the decision for you. Modern life is extraordinarily good at eliminating that attention. The thermostat reads temperature so you don't have to. The app gives the forecast so you don't have to watch the sky. The delivery arrives so you don't need to know how much food you have or where it came from. Every convenience that removes a layer of attention also removes a layer of competence. And when the convenience fails, which it does and will, there's nothing underneath it. The Holler people didn't build a survival system and then live inside it. They built a life in which survival is the background, invisible because it's always already happening. They never separated living from noticing. We traded that attention for convenience. Most of us don't even know what we stopped seeing. Stand at the mouth of any deep holler on a foggy morning and you'll hear the creek before you see it. Smell the wood smoke before you find the chimney. Now you know what that smoke line means. Pick one practice from this list and do it for 30 days. Not because disaster is coming, because you've stopped noticing things worth noticing, and noticing them back costs you nothing. Check the sky before you check your phone. Learn where your water actually comes from. Find the oldest person in your area who still knows how to do something the rest of the world has forgotten, and spend time with them before you can't. Which of these do you think got lost first? And do you know anyone still living this way? Tell me below. The knowledge weighs nothing, needs no signal, goes dark for nobody.